Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and the Gateway Farm Expo.
Hi everybody, I'm Bill Dodd, filling in for Troy Moling. Glad you could join us on Market Journal, and we've got a great show for you this week. Beginning today's broadcast, when it comes to fertilizer, UNL recommends a springtime application versus the fall. After all, it's more efficient to do it when the crop needs it as opposed to several months beforehand. But for producers who do choose to apply in the fall, there are some things to consider. Earlier this week, Extension Nutrient Management and Water Quality Specialist Dr. Javed Iqbal joined Market Journal's Troy Moling to discuss a new article he wrote on the topic. Javed recently started work at UNL, and he says there are some benefits you can get from the fall application that you won't find in the spring or summer.
The prices for fertilizers are cheap. There is more time for the farmers to apply fertilizers, and they have some tax benefits as well. And in fall, the soils are comparatively dry compared to spring, so that's why that contributes to preference for fall fertilizer application.
And in your article, you have a chart where you show the potential for nitrogen losses and crop uptake during the growing season. So explain to us what we're seeing here in this chart and how we can use this information when we're making our fertilizer decisions.
As you would see in the chart, there is more leaching and runoff potential during the early growing season compared to the crop uptake, which is late during the growing season, which starts actually from the May, June, July. So leaching and runoff potential for nitrogen doesn't match with corn nitrogen use. We recommend applying nitrogen fertilizer when the crop needs it. So multiple applications of nitrogen during the season would increase the nitrogen use efficiency and will increase the crop yield potential.
How are different soil types going to impact those fertilizer decisions?
So if you are going to apply fertilizer in fall, it is recommended to apply fertilizer in fine or medium to fine texture soils, because those soils has more clay or more organic matter and can hold ammonium nitrogen very well. Compared to sandy soils, when you are applying fertilizers in fall in sandy soil doesn't have as much as negative charges as the fine soils has. So there is less fertilizer holding capacity for sandy soils compared to fine textured soils. So there are more leaching potential, nitrate leaching potential in sandy soil compared to fine textured soils.
And then of course we have to talk about applying during certain temperatures, and from what I understand, the cooler the better, right?
Right. So cooler is better because nitrification stops below the 50 degree Fahrenheit. And nitrification is the process of converting ammonium nitrate to nitrogen. Nitrate nitrogen is really mobile, and it can be easily and readily lost from the soil profile. So when the temperature is below 50 degree, nitrification slows down. So that's why we generally recommend applying anhydrous when it's below 50 degree. And then nitrification would completely stop once the temperature goes below 32 degrees. So during the winter period, nitrification will stop, and it will help to safeguard the ammonium fertilizers into the soil.
And what about nitrogen stabilizers and the best products for that?
For nitrogen stabilizers, they are the chemicals that slows the release of ammonium to nitrate. NSERV is one of the common chemicals that is used with anhydrous ammonia during the fall application, and it can slow down the release of nitrogen from ammonium nitrogen, and can reduce the leaching potential.
And all this comes back to the 4 R's of fertilizer, and I know that's something that you like to focus on, right?
Right, yeah. So 4R nutrient management practices are really critical component of nitrogen management. Those include right time of nitrogen fertilizer application, the right source of fertilizers, right rate of fertilizers, and right placement of fertilizers. So if you would consider all these 4R management practices, it can really help us to increase the nitrogen use efficiency, to decrease the nitrogen losses that we often see in the form of nitrate leaching and denitrification. And overall, it can help us to increase the crop yield and the farmer's profit.
As we all know, this year has seen more moisture than normal in the soil profile, so if you do apply fertilizer, you'll need to be especially mindful as to avoid nitrogen loss. Javed says if you have optimal soil conditions, then anhydrous ammonia can be applied. We've got more information on this story on the Market Journal website. And moving on, the University of Nebraska Extension, in collaboration with the Nebraska FSA, will be hosting a series of Farm Bill education meetings over the next 2 months in order to give producers the opportunity to learn more about the similarities and differences in the programs like ARC and PLC. The 2018 Farm Bill was signed into law last December and reauthorized the existing agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage safety net programs that were in the 2014 Farm Bill. These meetings will help producers understand the program as well as recent changes and decisions to be made at sign-up now and in the coming years.
As we noted, this is the same program that producers had a decision on back in 2014 in the last Farm Bill. The decision between ARC and PLC at that time, but the environment is very different today. We are coming off of high prices in 2014, and the relative support in the ARC program made it quite popular with producers, particularly with corn and soybean producers. Now we're coming off of and dealing with lower prices, and the relative support between ARC and PLC changes, and so producers have to look at it more carefully before they simply say, the decision I made last time is still good. The same token, we expect a substantial shift in enrollment decisions, but it's not as easy as saying, I know what I want to do, I should just go do it. We're at levels where it's important to actually look at the analysis and make an informed decision.
Meetings for the month of November are scheduled for November 22nd in Bridgeport from 2 to 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Red Cloud, November 25th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Red Cloud Community Center, and Imperial, Nebraska, November 26th from 1:30 to 4:30 Mountain Standard Time at the Case County Fairgrounds 4-H building. For more information and registration, you can visit go.unl.edu/farmbill. Next up, when harvest is over and the cold starts coming in, many farmers start sowing their seeds for winter. Wheat may be the more popular choice, but UNL professor Dr. Stephen Baenziger believes that winter barley can be just as profitable. While there are similarities in benefits and needs, Dr. Baenziger believes that there are key differences that make the decision easier. Here's Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh with the story.
Well, barley is one of the most multi-purpose crops that's available to humankind. In the Great Plains, everybody knows barley can be used to make beer. But if you don't use it for malted products like beverages, you can also use it in food items. Many food items have malt in it. It's also used as a feed grain, and that's what's fed to animals because it's very good for nutrition. It's also used as a forage, so you can hay barley, you can graze barley. And then the last use is you use the hulless barleys in soups. So you have the barley beef soup, things like that. So it's a food grain also.
When putting barley into a crop rotation, planting it in the winter rather than the spring can be an advantage for many farmers. However, there are a few things to watch out for during the colder months.
The main advantage of winter barley is that you can plant it in the fall when it's usually easier to plant. We tend to be drier in the fall, so farmers can get into the ground quickly and more easily. The other advantage is it tends to be higher yielding because if you think, we go through a winter and if you're already planted, you've already got the plant growing, when it warms up in the spring, you have a huge head start on the spring barleys. The spring barleys have the advantage in that the major difficulty with winter barley is winter killing. So you don't have to worry about the winter killing your barley. So that's one advantage of spring barleys. The biggest disadvantage is, can you get it in on time? Because the fields are often wet, they have to dry out. And then because they get in later, you often get into the hotter part of the season, so you'll see more shriveled seed and that'll hurt your yields. Historically, the winter barley has higher yields than the spring barley. Well, the number one thing that I always worry about is barley's actually pretty winter hardy, but it breaks dormancy pretty easily. So what you have to worry about is when you have a warm spell in the middle of winter and the barley starts to grow, then it freezes back down again, and now you've got it so that it's used up its reserves, and all of it's going to be wasted because the crop was frozen.
For producers looking to include barley in their rotations, new equipment may not be needed as there is little difference between barley and wheat when it comes to planting.
Well, the equipment will be the same, okay, but most farmers that have equipment use it for multiple crops. So a lot of them really modern seeders like air seeders and whatnot, they can handle multiple different crops. The biggest difference between wheat and barley is that in both crops I recommend seed treatments because it's inexpensive insurance, but for barley I think it's almost a necessity. Barley is much more susceptible to head smut than is wheat, and to me, if you're going to grow barley, I highly recommend that when you plant it, you use a seed treatment on that seed in the same type of seeder that you're going to use for your winter wheat. You're going to harvest it with the same combines. You'll change your settings, of course, but you'll use all the same equipment. So if you're going to plant a winter wheat, a winter barley, or even a winter triticale, all the equipment's the same.
Due to its planting time, barley is not affected by many diseases. In fact, many of the diseases found in wheat don't make an appearance in barley at all.
Barley is really unique in that many of the diseases that affect other small grains like wheat are, we call it escapes. It's a little bit earlier, so it misses the time when the infection occurs. So the only diseases that I really see in barley are the smut, the head smut, and then there's an aphid transmitted virus called barley yellow dwarf virus, which if you ever have aphids, you will find in barley. But again, that's relatively rare. We have a fair amount, but we don't have the long springs that say Oklahoma has where it's much more severe. And the smut is easily treated with almost any of the seed treatments. Other than that, the other diseases, leaf rust we rarely see, stem rust, only if the crop is really delayed. Stripe rust I've never seen. So it's a very good disease package, mainly because the crop is early and misses the infection.
If you're looking to introduce barley into your own rotation, Stephen says to check with your local Extension Education office for more information. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks as always, Maddie. You'll find more information on growing barley at cropwatch.unl.edu. And moving on to markets now, on Wednesday I was joined by Dr. Scott Irwin, an agricultural economist at the University of Illinois, to discuss a range of topics, including the record number of farm bankruptcies being filed across the country. Last time we talked with Dr. Irwin, we discussed market facilitation payments that would offset some of the heat ag producers were feeling from the trade war with China. We began this segment by asking why we're seeing such an uptick in Chapter 12 filings among ag producers, and if the trade woes such as the trade war with China or the congressional holdup of the USMCA trade deal have been contributing factors to producers facing these hardships.
I think those have been percolating for the last 5 years with the sharp drop in prices that we've seen from the peak years of 2007 through 2013 for the last 5 years. Any operation that was very aggressive during the boom years in terms of prices, in terms of bidding for cash rents, buying land, leverage, has really suffered for the last 5 years. And that's the main reason why we're seeing this uptick in the farm bankruptcies.
All right. So we all know what a miserable season it's been for farmers battling the weather here in the Corn Belt. In fact, our last discussion revolved around a lot of late planting as we're heading into the end of the growing season for many crops. How are we looking with current harvest conditions?
It has really, truly been kind of a biblical year for U.S. Corn Belt farmers, particularly in the Eastern Corn Belt. It started, record wet and record unprecedented late plantings. Mm-hmm. The summer growing season ended up being reasonably good in many places, and there's still some good yields out there. But the end of the 2019 growing season and the harvest period is just kind of jaw-dropping about the amount of negative weather events that have occurred. You know, we had an October winter blizzard in the upper Dakotas, a couple of hard killing freezes before the normal freeze dates, and we've had an accumulation of snow. It's incredible wetness in much of the Midwest, and now we're going to be faced next week with some of the coldest weather I've ever heard of in November. So it's really a terrible finish in many areas to the 2019 growing season. Beyond just the discomfort that it causes farmers and the difficult field conditions, it's certainly not helping our late maturing and crops that are still standing in the field, which there's a lot. About a quarter of the soybeans are still unharvested, and roughly half of the corn right now. So we have a huge amount of our crops still sitting out in the field and under just kind of an assault from the weather conditions.
So Scott, how much of a factor has weather been in the harvest season, and what should producers be keeping an especially close eye on as we prepare for the next planting season?
Well, I think there's two things that are going to be foremost in everybody's minds that watches the markets. You know, one, how are we going to finish up this season? Are we going to end up with the backlog of fall tillage that never gets done this year, just like we did last year, which put us behind the 8 ball last spring? And it sure looks like we're going to have something like that. I mean, it's going to freeze up hard for a long period of time, starting about Sunday night this week, and that may help actually in getting some of that final crop out. But you know, it's really going to present difficulties in getting the fall tillage done after harvest that we would normally want to see. And then, of course, the big thing looking forward is what kind of recovery in terms of corn and soybean planted acreage are we going to see next year, assuming we don't have the same kind of record wet planting conditions that we did last year, or this year, excuse me.
And Scott, before we let you go, do you have any marketing tips or advice you'd like to share with our viewers as we get in the home stretch of the harvest season?
Well, I maintain a moderately bullish bias in my own views, which would lean towards not being too aggressive at selling out of the field, and I think that's probably the way many farmers are behaving anyway. I'm particularly concerned about the effect of the fall weather on harvested acreage and yield for soybeans. You know, the quarter of the soybeans that are sitting out there, and most of them in North Dakota that are unharvested, huge millions of acres of unharvested soybeans out there, are going to take anywhere from 0 to 5 degree lows for 3 or 4 days next week. And what I remember is when you go back and harvest those beans, that's not good for harvest loss. So I maintain I'm most concerned about production declines in soybeans compared to corn, but this probably isn't even good for corn as well. So that gives you a little bit of a slight bias tilt. It's slight because the demand news, particularly for corn, is not very good right now.
Thanks again to Scott for being on the show. Next week, we'll be joined by Iowa State University Ag Economist Dr. Chad Hart. So if you have a question you'd like for us to ask him, let us know via email or social media, and we'll be sure to pass your question along. Moving on, and many producers may often wonder what sets an efficient farm apart from the average farm. Well, in a lot of cases, it may simply be doing many things better. Nebraska Farm Business Incorporated recently unveiled its data for its top efficient farms group of 2018, showing a comparison between the most efficient farms and the average of all farms working with the NFBI. You can read about the differences that set the top efficient farms apart from the rest in the November Nebraska Farmer. And it's time now to get a check of the weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, how's the forecast looking for the week ahead?
Well, Bill, we have definitely seen our first good taste of winter across the state. Although we've had snow earlier in the month in western Nebraska, we've really seen some very cold temperatures move in during the middle of the week as we've seen an Arctic front move through the region. Almost all of the snow fell to the north and to the east of Nebraska, so we were very fortunate in that retrospect by not getting much in the way of accumulating snowfall. And we started to see some moderation in temperatures, particularly as we got toward the end of this week. And we are looking at a very nice day for Saturday before things really fall apart on us and we go right back to below normal temperatures. The only good news that I have in terms of this is that, at least from a harvesting standpoint, we don't look like we're going to see any significant moisture that is going to bring an abrupt stop to harvest activity. So from that aspect, we do have a good forecast. If you like cold weather, you're going to love what's coming up next. So as we go to the upper air models, our cold air is just on our doorsteps. We have a northwest flow aloft that's going to push toward the south over the next 24 hours and bring a cold front through the region. We do have a surface low indicated in the northeastern portions of the state. There's just not enough moisture feed to come northward, so most of the precipitation you see depicted for Saturday is essentially flurry activity as we are in a very dry area to our north, and then Sunday or tomorrow we start to see that cold air really flying down the front range of the Rocky Mountains, and we're going to see some exceptionally cold weather. Temperatures dropping throughout the day, particularly across southern Nebraska. We may be in the 40s early, but it is going to gradually drop off into the lower 30s by the end of the day. And then by Monday, the cold air really surges down as we have a straight flow out of the north. Looks to be our coldest day of this month so far as high pressure settles in. Maybe a slight flurry activity with a little bit of upslope flow to the west, but more importantly, we will see lows as we go into Tuesday morning that will be in the single digits to possibly sub-zero northeast Nebraska. And by Tuesday, we start to see that high pressure system move off to our east. Low pressure stacks up into portions of Montana, but really no active weather system in the center part of the country, so dry weather isn't forecasted. Then we get a little reinforcing shot of cooler air coming in on Wednesday as high pressure quickly moves in. Another piece of impulse comes in through the northwest flow. Once again, moisture is lacking as most of the energy is to our south, so there is some flurry activity indicated to our north, but it should remain to the north. And then on Thursday, we start to finally see an easing up of this troughing pattern as our ridge starts to expand, so we'll start to see our warmest temperatures in western Nebraska. And by the end of the week, we will start to see that spread into eastern Nebraska as we start to get on the backside of this high in a southwesterly flow. Most of flurry activity remains in the upper Great Lakes region. And on Friday, we start to see some ridging taking place at a much greater extent. I would expect we're going to be closer to normal as we get into next Friday in terms of temperatures. We start to get a southerly flow coming out of the Gulf, and we have another trough in the western United States that starts to move onshore. This should start to bring some moisture into California and ease considerably their wildfire danger. In terms of the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, that cold air mass shifts off to the east. We start to see the warmth coming in, and I think this will come in a little bit quicker than is being depicted here. Probably by we get into the weekend, we'll be back to normal temperatures across the state. In terms of precipitation, certainly I do agree with this, below normal precipitation from the central Rocky Mountains eastward as we are under the influence of the high pressure system that starts to shift off toward the east. As we go further out into the forecast, there are increasing signs that trough that's coming in the western United States will likely result in a pattern change across the west, meaning more stormy conditions. And generally here in Nebraska, we typically figure about 7 days for that trough to come in the western United States before it starts impacting us here in the central Corn Belt. So buyer beware, we are looking at the possibility of some very stormy activity. And if everything matches up, most likely that period that will be exceptionally stormy will be the last 7 to 10 days of the month. So we'll keep an eye on that pattern to see if it does impact us. So overall, Bill, it looks like we're going to have a nice day the first half of the weekend, and then conditions deteriorate in terms of temperatures. We're going to be well below normal, struggling to get into the 30s on Monday and Tuesday before we start to see a warm up. The good news is no precipitation expected.
Thanks, Al. Moving on, and coming up later this month, the Gateway Farm Expo is the longest running farm show in Nebraska, and this month we'll be celebrating its 50th year. The event runs from November 20th through the 21st at the Buffalo County Fairgrounds in Kearney, and it brings in over 4,000 visitors and 300 exhibitors. Proceeds from the show help benefit ag education in communities across Nebraska. Market Journal is one of the sponsors this year, and it promises to be a very good time. You can learn more about the Gateway Farm Expo at gatewayfarmexpo.org. And finally today, registration is now open for a Women Managing Ag Land conference on December 11th in Lincoln at the Nebraska Innovation Campus. This conference aims to help landowners and tenants navigate the challenges that are being faced in ag today. More and more women are taking a lead role in their family's farming operation, and Nebraska Extension's Allan Vyhnalek says this conference is for them.
Clearly, the ag workforce of the future is going to have to be less gender-based. Traditionally been all male. I think as we go forward, I think we'll have more female operators. We do now, more now than when I was a child, for instance, and I think that'll continue to happen. I think that instead of brothers farming together, it'll be husbands and wives farming together. We think that the conference is terribly important because of the phone calls we receive in our offices. Like, for instance, I'll get a call from a 50 or 60-year-old woman that says, I grew up on the farm. I'm the oldest child, so my mom and dad made me a power of attorney for their business affairs in case they cannot conduct their business. My dad's been gone. He's passed away. My mom is now infirm. She's in a nursing home, and she has dementia, so she can no longer answer for herself. So therefore, I need to manage the farm for her. And the saddest part of the story is that maybe they don't have a written farm lease, and she goes, there's no written lease, and now I have to go talk to the tenant, our neighbor, who's been on that farm for 20 or 30 years, whatever it's been, usually decades. And I don't know exactly how to approach him about what the lease is going to be for next year. The other thing I run into is I'll run into some widows, not very often, but every once in a while I'll run into a on-farm widow that had her husband passed away and she's trying to hold it together. Husband didn't share much about the information about what was going on out there. She doesn't know much about the business dealings, and so this is a conference to help that person out.
Once more, this event will be held December 11th at Nebraska's Innovation Campus here in Lincoln. It begins at 9:30 a.m. and you can register now. The event costs $45 and lunch is included. Some of the speakers include Nebraska Extension's Jim Jansen and Kathy Anderson from the Nebraska FSA. There will also be 12 workshops including topics on land leases, rental rates, property tax relief, and managing farm risk. More information is on the screen, and we've got more information on the Market Journal website as well. Well, that's going to wrap things up for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, you can download the Market Journal mobile app, and be sure to follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, Dr. Chad Hart will be our market analyst, and we'll give you some tips on what to look for with this year's winter wheat crop. All that and a whole lot more. We'll see you next time. I'm Bill Dodd. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and the Gateway Farm Expo. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.